And hello, everyone, and welcome back to Get a Grip with Coach Elix. I'm your host, Coach Elix, and with me, my amazing co host,
Attorney Masick is here.
also Stephen the Medium, also my amazing husband. So, first and foremost, our apologies. We had some technical difficulties as the station lost internet power, and we were off the air unexpectedly. But that's what happens when you do a live show. Stuff happens, and you have to dance with what life gives you. When it gives you lemons, we make delicious lemonade.
Oh, I was drinking lemonade, Elix, because I was talking for so long and then said, does that make sense? And I'm like, hello?
And you heard nothing. So let's go back, Stephen, and recreate, what I was saying to you, because I know we lost power right at the beginning of the conversation, was that, we often, our life is shaped by, whether messages from family, experiences, in our childhood, cultural expectations, moments where we may have felt seen or unseen. And you talked about the waves, the rough waters, the rocks. And I asked you, is that, are those experiences what relates to that metaphor, the waves, the rough water? And you went to explain. So take it from there. Give us a better insight into exactly what your metaphor, how people can better understand your metaphor.
Better? I didn't even get to say it the first time, but just saying.
Well, you did. You talked about mothership.
Yeah, but no one heard it, right? I mean,
no. I think they heard the mothership and the dingings separating. I think
it's this dinghy. I love talking about dinghies. All right, so listen, just to put this in a nutshell, and again, Elix and I apologize if you've heard this, if you haven't, but in a very quick nutshell. So as I was talking about the analogy about the mothership and the dinghies, what I was trying to say to you, Elix, when you were asking about like people picking up beliefs and cultural things and issues and all of that, when one of these little dinghies decides to keep going further and further away from the mothership, that's where problems begin. Because remember, the mothership, again, dictates or is leading us 100%, because our souls don't know anything else. They're leading us to why we're here. What is our meaning? Why did we come in this lifetime? What did we come to do? And it just keeps going forward to get us to that meaning, to learn the lessons, our passion, our purpose, and every single reason why we were placed here. That's what the mothership does. So when you detour off and completely forget about the mothership and you start going further and further away, and then you have no realization that when you turn to look back, you can't even see the mothership anymore. You are off, because you may have seen something that looks way far out, like this island, and oh my God, I want to go to this island. So you head towards it, and then you're so far away from mothership, you don't see it anymore. And then when you get to this island, you realize it's not an island, it is a pod of sharks. There's just a lot of sharks. Clearly not the place you want to be in this little dinghy, and the sharks start coming at you. And just imagine what that would be like, right? The anxiety and the fear, and, are you going to survive, and all of that, which then, makes you go even further away from the mothership, because the only thing you're thinking about is, I want to live. I want to get away from these sharks. And you go even further out, and then there's something else happens. There's a big storm that happens, and you're not equipped as a little dinghy to handle this big storm like you would be if you were next to your mothership and had protection that way. And then the boat gets water in it, it gets damaged, you may fall out of the boat. So those are all different feelings. Really what that represents is you pulling away from your soul, meaning that, say in life, you go into high school and you meet someone who immediately is not the same, hasn't had the same experience as you, but what they're doing is maybe experimenting with drugs or experimenting with liquor, and they want to pull you on board, and you've got that decision to make, right? Do I want to do that or don't I want to do that? Well, if you give that sort of analogy with the little dinghy that's with the shocks and now in the storm, that would really represent that you've decided, yeah, that's kind of cool. I'm going to go with this kid. And then you meet other friends that are all doing the same thing. And then you stop going to school and there goes the getting a high school diploma and then going to college and all of that. It's just a representation that journey is not why you're here, right? It's you went away from your mothership, you went away from your soul, and now you're going on this journey that really isn't your journey, and you're trying to just survive. Versus if you were to stay next to mothership, you would at that stage be like, no, thank you. I know what I'm supposed to be here for. I want to graduate. I want to go to college, and I hope that makes sense.
Well, let's make sure that it does. So somebody listening, Stephen, and they are listening to you, and how you're using the metaphors, right? And they say, "How do I? What is does the mothership represent for me? What's an example of what that would look like for somebody listening, or what is an example of what a shark represents to any one of us in life?"
Well, as I mentioned, the shock would represent the one kid that may want to pull you in to what they're doing, which is not a good thing. I mean, if you're in high school, and I'm just using that as an example, you don't want to be in high school and you're starting to drink or you're starting to do drugs. Ultimately, if the effect is going to be that you're not going to school, you're skipping school, your studies are going down, everything that you started school most likely, or in this particular case, this example, that you wanted, right? You're going to graduate and you're going to go to college. So the shocks represent that. And then when I say the shocks and then the storm, you could say yes to that one person and say start drinking. You go out one night and they've got liquor and you start drinking and then you skip school. But then it goes on to the next level of then you meet another person who, is doing drugs or so, and you get into that. So away from your mothership is really the potential that can happen. It is like a snowball effect that keeps going and going, but it doesn't have to be to that extent. Like that's a sort of a severe extent. It could be something like somebody doing the same thing, heading off with their dinghy and with the shocks, but what that represents for them is losing their voice. Of just someone who is being used as why can't I think of a doormat? It's just they're being sort of abused in an emotional way from people that are toxic, and they're letting it happen. They're not finding their voice. They're not standing up for themselves because of what they feel about lack of self-esteem, lack of self-confidence, just not feeling good about themselves. All of that happens when your dinghy leaves the mothership, which is your authentic self. So when you also asked about like how do they know, or what's the authentic self in your soul is always going to be why you're here. It's always going to be positive, and it's going to be love. It's going to be like listen, you're here for a reason, right? You're here to learn a lesson or lessons, and you're here to learn what your curiosities are and your passion and your purpose, and to really find them and just goes full steam ahead with them, so that your life is wonderful and you're fulfilling what you want to do. That's your authentic self. When the dinghies go off, that's what happens.
Okay, I have questions. So what about the labels, right? So because life happens to all of us, and
Of course.
we have labels. I'm not confident. I'm not creative. I'm not smart. I'm not a leader. I'm not ready. And then those labels lead to, identities, right? Or versions of ourselves that we relate as that's who we are. Because there are people, Stephen, out there who literally relate to themselves as I am not smart. Mm-hmm. And that becomes their identity. And if you ask, is that who you are? They'll say, yeah, I am absolutely not smart. And the way they frame it almost is like their blood type is not smart. How can this conversation help them let go of that outdated or not real version of themselves?
I love the question, and let me tell you that I want to make sure I'm very clear that it, like you said, Elix, this happens to a very very large majority of us. So I don't want you to think what I'm saying is like, oh, it's only you or it's only this person. For the most part, it's all of us. And how we get away from that mothership, there's many ways. Sometimes it's just voluntary. Oh, I see what I think is an island, and I want to be independent, and I move away. Or it can be something that triggers you, or it can be trauma. For me, a perfect example is my dad takes his life when I'm 8 years old. That's when my dinghy completely left the mothership. I couldn't handle it. I couldn't handle that. And as that dinghy left my mothership is when I was allowed to start accepting things that weren't real and didn't benefit me. Of it's my fault. He did this because he wouldn't have taken his life if he didn't love his youngest son. His youngest son was the problem. His youngest son wasn't who he thought he was. And I just kept going and going and going and just building and building and building to self-hatred, like wanting to leave this life, all of that, because that trauma triggered my dinghy to leave the mothership. Now, if somehow, some way I figured out at 8 years old that I want to stay next to my mothership, the majority of that, and I'm not saying all of it, the majority of that would not have happened. I would not have went down that road. I would have been able to somehow balance that it wasn't me, or maybe get there quicker than years and years that I needed to sort of go through that whole horrible place and get away from. I was living someone else's life. I was away from the mothership. How I figured that out, well, I mean, working with spirit, I did, but honestly, it was really just about taking inventory and figuring out where I was, and is this the place where I want to be.
So this is it's a deep, it's a thought-provoking conversation. So this may require for you guys to sort of like process a lot of what Stephen is saying, because it is very profound. But we do need to take a break, Stephen. So let's take a small break. And when we come back, we're going to continue with the conversation. Have you really ever been introduced to yourself? We'll be right back. And hello, everyone. Welcome back to Get a Grip with Coach Elex. I'm your host, Coach Elex, and with me, my amazing co-host,
Steve in the medium.
Stephen, who is also my husband. So if you're listening live on radio, you probably saw that we got disconnected. There was a loss of internet power at the station, which caused us to break for a little bit. And if you were listening in the live stream, you also lost the connection. So we have a brand new connection. We apologize about that. That's what happens when you do live TV, live radio. So we just got to dance with what we got. But what Stephen and I were talking about is maybe, this is yet another opportunity to perhaps have a part two of this conversation, because it is a deep conversation. It is a thought-provoking conversation, but I think it's an important conversation for all of us to have. And today's subject, if you're just joining us, is the question: have you ever been introduced to yourself? So, Stephen, I do have a question for you. Is how do we answer the question, who is our true self? What is our true identity? And how do we get to either meet that identity, reinvent that identity, or reconnect to that true self of ours? How do we get to that place?
Well, let me say this before I sort of answer, or I am answering this way. I mentioned earlier in the show that I think it was 2021, the beginning of 2021, I did a Meet Yourself. I did this presentation, and it's on my website, so you can find it on my website. That is the first time since I've been on this earth that I actually was introduced to myself. In January 2021, I think it was. I could be wrong. It could be 2022, but I think it was right after COVID. So one of those Januaries. My entire life, I had never met myself. I didn't know who I was.
Who did you think you were?
I had no idea. I had a perception of myself of just being always. I was just someone who was very angry, someone who didn't want to go anywhere near what I was feeling, someone who didn't want to acknowledge who and what I was feeling. I wasn't aware of it. I hated myself. I was very judgmental to people. I didn't know myself up until 8 years old. And the trigger, as I mentioned earlier, was my dad taking his life. At 8 years old, that happened. And I say I never met myself. I didn't know who I was. I was never introduced to myself because, at 8 years old, you're still you're a little one, right? You're still at a place of, you're just going on life, or you're just like everything is just fun, and you're 8 years old. So when that happened at 8, I took off. I left with that dinghy, as I mentioned, and I was somebody I didn't know at all. So to answer your question, I started, one day I just started thinking, what is my life like? And what happened was I was driving, we were here on the Cape. We had moved here, and I was driving someplace, and this woman cut in front of me, and I'm going to make this really quick, and just literally came out of a side street, and I almost rammed into her. And so of course I was so aggravated, and I was heading to this little pond place for a whole different story, but I was heading there. So of course I'm yelling in my head, what's wrong with this woman? And I could shed white hair, so I knew she was a little bit older, but it was still so aggravated, you didn't see me. So lo and behold, where did she go? Same place I'm going. She pulls into this little place where the pond is, and I pull in. And so she gets there first because she's in front of me. She opens her door, and as I'm opening my door, she's like, "Sir," and to make it to add oil, or is it oil to the fire? I don't know. To make it worse,
Fuel to the fire.
Listen, I was close. She opens the door and, "Sir," and I'm like, "Oh my God, what is this woman doing to me?" She was like, "Do you have a dog?" With this sort of very forceful kind of question. And I looked at her and I was like, "No." And she looked at me, "Okay, because I have a dog and I just want to make sure I can let him loose." And so, she lets him loose. I go around, and she said to me, "Can I say something to you?" And I'm like, "Oh my God, why is this woman what is she doing to me?" And I'm like, Sure. And she said, I don't know what it is about you, but I'm really glad that I just got to say that to you and ask about if you had a dog. And I think there's something very special about you, and you're going to have a very special day and special life. And I
Wow.
completely changed. I looked at her like, what is going on here? And I remember I looked at her and was like, "Oh, that's really sweet. And thank you for that." And I got in the car. There was a couple of other details of how we got there, but I got in my car and then I pulled out and I went into this neighborhood and started just sitting in my car crying. Like, what am I doing? Like, this woman had no idea I was behind her. I mean, rightfully or wrongfully so. Nothing happened. I didn't hit her. She had no idea I was there. And I made up this whole story like she did it purposely, and she saw me and she doesn't care about me. And right then, and it was like that was probably during COVID. It was 2020, and right then it just hit me like, what am I doing? And something I don't think I could pinpoint it, but at that point I was like, who am I? This is not
Mm.
me. Like I don't think I'm living my life. I don't think I'm who I'm supposed to be. And I don't know if that was spirit helping me, but all I know is that that was the defining moment, and I started going on this journey of why. I started deciphering right there, why did I get so mad? Like, what's going on with me? And I started going into places I never wanted to go to because they were hurtful, and I cried and I didn't want to do it, and I had to look at myself. But that was the journey, Elix. It was really deciphering why I did that, why I was so mad, and then expanding it to, oh my God, I know another example why I did that, and another example of why I did that, and like it just kept going and going and going, and I started the journey of starting to break down what I thought who I was, and realizing that's not me. And I started turning my dinghy and heading back to my mothership.
Yeah. That is a beautiful, and I would say often if you're listening, you're probably asking yourself, but how do I get there myself, Stephen? You've done all this work, and you knew to ask yourself, why am I doing this?
Right.
But somebody that doesn't have that insight, how can they make that shift for themselves? What's a real quick, as we're getting to the top of the hour, exercise that we can offer them that could help them start the conversation?
I think very quickly, pick one day, one night, like just look at your day and just see like what transpired in your day. Like, are you happy with everything that happened throughout that day? Was there something that someone said to you that you wanted to say something back to them and you rightfully think you should have and you didn't? That's just an example, but just take a look and do this a couple of times. Excuse me, a couple of times to see like what you're looking at on a daily basis. Is that a place where you want to be? It does it feel like this is what you want to represent on a daily basis of really who you are? Well, you just start there, and honestly, like everything starts opening up. If you are committed and vulnerable, because a lot of times it's not going to be easy, but if you start doing it, it will start opening up. It
And
will,
open, and you got to be open.
of course,
You got to
of
be
course.
open. Well, we are at the top of the hour, but if you've been listening to the conversation, and again, it's a deep, thought-provoking conversation. We got interrupted in the middle of it, but perhaps I want to leave you with this. Perhaps the most important introduction that we've ever received is the one that we have with ourselves, and not that person that we were 10 years ago, not the person that others expect from us or for us to be, but the person that we are. Like Stephen said, like really asking what is your true purpose? Why are you here? And remember, growth invites us to continually rediscover ourselves, to question those old assumptions, to become curious rather than certain. So as you reflect on today's conversation, I'm inviting you to ask yourself, if you were meeting yourself for the first time today, what might surprise you? Because remember, the relationship we have with ourselves shapes every other relationship in our lives. And sometimes the greatest discovery is realizing that we are work in progress. We're still growing. We're still evolving. We are still becoming. So I want to thank all of you for sticking with us and listening to our show, Get a Grip with Coach Elix. Stephen, let people know where they can find you.
Stephen the Medium on my website and social media.
Same with Elix, Coach Elix, anywhere on social media. And until next time, stay curious and stay in the conversation. We will, and by the way, thank you, Dave, our producer. Thank you to the entire team at WARA. And a shout out to our producer, Mark, who is at home recovering. So we are sending you good, positive, healing thoughts so that you can get back to work.
And by the way, Elix, next week is Through the Static.
Ooh, that's a good catch, Steve. Dave and I were talking about that. So next week, you get a nice treat. You get Stephen the Medium taking over Through the Static. So have a wonderful weekend, everyone. We'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.